Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Exchange 2013 Management Tools. With Exchange 2010, there were three different Exchange management options. Well, that's changed now with Exchange 2013. 2013 has both an Exchange Administration Console, an EAC, and that's your web-based GUI management option, and it has an Exchange Management Shell. As an Exchange administrator, it's important and absolutely necessary that you know how to work with both the EAC and the EMS. Okay, so let's get started. So here you can clearly see that when it comes to managing your Exchange 2013 environment, you have two very different options. On the left-hand side, the Exchange Admin Center, or EAC. On the right-hand side, the Exchange Management Shell, or EMS. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, look, I am going to always gravitate toward the GUI management solution. And that's okay. You can handle most of your tasks through the Exchange Admin Center. There are times, however, when the best way to do something, and sometimes even the only way to do something, is through the Exchange Management Shell. So it's essential that you become comfortable with both. But let's take the easy path first, the GUI Administration Center. Let's jump over to our server and let's review the terminology in terms of the navigation of the Exchange Admin Center, and then we'll go through a walking tour of the Exchange Admin Center so that you can see how easy it is to maneuver through the various features and manage your Exchange environment. Then we'll come back to the slides and we'll talk a little bit more about the Exchange Management Shell, and then we'll get our feet wet when it comes to working with that shell. If you've never worked with PowerShell before, that's okay. We're going to get you started now so that you can become comfortable with it through Exchange 2013. One thing's for certain, it's not going away. So if you thought that this was just a passing fad that Microsoft would give up after a couple of years, well, that's not accurate. It's actually becoming more and more ingrained in every Microsoft product, from Server 2012 to Exchange to SharePoint to the entire System Center lineup of tools. It's something that's ingrained in everything. So to maintain your relevance as an administrator, you're going to have to learn PowerShell at some point. So it might as well be today. But first, let's take a look at the EAC. So we're going to take a look at the Exchange Administration Center. But before we do that, let's get a little bit more information about the EAC. So one of the things I really love about TechNet is the fact that you can pretty much research anything about Exchange and you'll get an entire article, explanations on how the feature was developed, what you can do with it, the Exchange Management Shell commandlets for it. And so really you want to make good use of TechNet. And with a quick Google or Bing search, you can pretty much find anything you want within TechNet that will help you along your journey of learning Exchange. But even in day-to-day administration of Exchange, there are things that you just forget over time, and TechNet is really just an excellent resource that you should be constantly tapping into. So here we can see that there's a TechNet article on the Exchange Administration Center. It gives some information about it. It even gives some information about how to access the EAC, the internal and external URL for accessing it. And then you can see down here, there's actually a great graphic that helps you to see what each of the different aspects of the EAC are called, the feature pane, the toolbar, the list view. It's a little hard to see, so I've saved this graphic off to my desktop here. We can see it a little bit better in full screen. And so you can see here that up at the top of your Exchange Administration Center, we have the various cross-premises navigation. This is for situations where you might have an on-premise enterprise deployment of Exchange 2013 and then your Office 365 hybrid deployment so that you can manage both from within the same console. On the left-hand side, we call this the feature pane. So it's not a navigation pane, it's called a feature pane, so we'll be referring to it as that. And then you'll see as you select a feature that we have the toolbar here and then the list view. So the list view will change as well as the tabs. These will change as well. So depending on what feature we choose, we'll see a different set of tabs and a different list view. The toolbar itself will pretty much stay the same. However, some of the options that we have here will be different. There are notifications when you're doing something. This is not something that you see all the time, but when you're actually in the middle of doing something like, in this case, a migration, it will notify you up here at the top. This is actually a great addition to an Exchange administration console or center in that we didn't have alerts before. So if we were in the middle of a migration and we were doing other things, we would have to go back to the portion of the navigation in order to see that migration and see how we were doing. Up here at the top we have the Me tile and Help, and so this is where you see who you are, and you can also switch the user here. We'll see that in a moment. And then over on the right side, they call this the Details pane. So with an MMC console, we would have navigation, we would have a work and results pane in the middle, sometimes both, and then over on the right we'd have the action pane. Now it's called a Details pane, but there are links that you can select so you can take action from this pane on the right. Okay, so this gives us a little bit of a better understanding as far as the layout of the EAC. Let's actually open up the EAC and let's take a look at these from within our working Exchange environment. Just remember, Feature pane, we have tabs, we have the toolbar, List View, and Details pane. So to get started, we're already in our browser. We can just open up a new tab. So you have your internal or your external URL. Now it just depends on how you have this set up. In our case, we can type in https:// we can type in the name of the server, ex2k13, and then we can type in ECP, right, for an internal access to our Exchange Admin Center. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, why are we typing in ECP? That stands for Exchange Control Panel. Yes, it does. Yes, they probably should have changed this, but they didn't, and so it's still ECP, which is what we have left over from Exchange 2010. Maybe they'll fix that with SP1. Maybe they won't. Either way, we have a job to do. So ECP is the proper link. We access it, and then oddly enough, it doesn't take us to our Exchange Administration Center login. It takes us to the Outlook Web App login. But this is not actually going to take us into Outlook Web App. So if we type in our domain and username, and then our password, and hit enter, notice it takes us into the Exchange Admin Center. Again, you recall up here at the top, we can switch between Enterprise and Office 365 if we have an Office 365 connection. Over here, you recall, what do we call this again? We call this our Features pane. Here's our tabs, our toolbar. Here's the List View. And then over here on the right, we have our Details pane. Here's the Me tile. If we select the down arrow, we can switch from administrator to another user. Here we have our Help. We can click Help, disable Help Bubble, privacy, copyright, nothing fancy there. And then you recall here we have a user selected, and over on the right in the Details pane, there are links where we can take action. So you can see how in this case, this user does not have unified messaging enabled. We can click Enable to enable that user. We can disable Exchange Active Sync. We can enable in-place archive and so forth. And again, these all change depending on what feature we have selected. So if we select servers, you can see here that now we have the server selected. We can see databases. And then depending on what is chosen, you can see information about the database on the right-hand side, view more details. You can see the various options here. And remember, when you're not certain what a specific icon might mean because they're using icons instead of words, you can put your cursor over it and it will tell you what the icon means. Some of them are pretty intuitive, others not so much. And then the three dots, that always means more. If you select that, here we can dismount the database. If we go back up to recipients and we select more, you can see that it really is based upon what we have selected as far as what the more item will give us. So that's really your working tour of the Exchange Admin Center. The EAC is a very simple web-based console, but it has a lot of neat features like notifications that will come up here when we have something that's working in the background. The details pane can be very helpful, especially with the links that help us to perform certain actions. So all of this can come together to really help us to manage our Exchange properly. But the EAC is not the only way to manage Exchange. We also have the Exchange Management Shell. Let's jump back over to the slides and let's talk a little bit about the Exchange Management Shell so that we can get a little bit more comfortable with it before we jump in and start working with it. The Exchange Management Shell is built upon PowerShell. Now, PowerShell is both a command line tool as well as a scripting platform. There's a lot of debate that goes on back and forth as far as what PowerShell really is. In our case, when it comes to Exchange, it's really a powerful way to accomplish so much using as little as one line of code. Now, that code, it's not super complicated. We don't have to become programmers and developers in order to use PowerShell. It's so easy to use in comparison with other methods that we used to have to use in the past in order to get the same data coming our way. Exchange 2013 requires PowerShell version 3, which is the latest flavor of PowerShell with all of the bells and whistles that come with it. Now, PowerShell commands are built using commandlets. So that's how you pronounce that, commandlets. And you'll see that it's a very simple structure that we're going to demonstrate in a moment. Through PowerShell commands, you can manage every aspect of Exchange, whereas through the EAC, you can manage almost every aspect of Exchange. So there are certain things that can be done through the Exchange Management Shell with PowerShell commandlets that you cannot do through the EAC GUI. Now, you might find that frustrating, but keep in mind, the Exchange Management Shell is really the underlying force behind everything you do in the EAC. When you ask for a new recipient to be created through the EAC, through the GUI tools, what really happens in the background is a PowerShell commandlet is run so that that new recipient can be created. So everything you do in the GUI actually gets converted into a PowerShell command. It's that PowerShell command that actually performs the task that you're trying to do through the graphic interface. So logically then, the PowerShell side is going to be more powerful. You're going to have more flexibility and more options working within the PowerShell side through the Exchange Management Shell than you would working through a GUI, which is really designed to fit around the most common management tasks that administrators would typically like to perform, like creating a recipient, creating a database, deleting a database, things of that sort. So there can only be so many different GUI options that can be provided. But if you know the underlying PowerShell commands, really then the options are limitless in terms of what you can do. So learning PowerShell is not an option if you're working with Exchange. It's a necessity. So we might as well start now. Now, we mentioned a moment ago that the commands in PowerShell are actually made up of commandlets. Commandlets follow a very simple verb-noun structure. So some of the common verbs are things like get, set, remove, test, enable, disable, install, uninstall, new, and move. Those are the most common verbs that you'll see. So a good example of that is get-service. Now in this case, this is a simple commandlet, two words put together. It doesn't give a lot of information in terms of what service we're looking for, or are we looking for a service that's running or a service that's stopped. We don't really give any extra information. And you'll see in a moment that when we type in a commandlet like get-service, it will simply return to us the results of all of the services that are running. But if we wanted to narrow that down, we need to be more specific with our commandlet and put in the various parameters that will get us more information. At the same time, in order to make our commands more complex, we can string commandlets together using a pipeline. A pipeline is that up and down looking character. So you use pipelines to help string commandlets together and to help really expand out what your command is actually trying to accomplish. So for example, we have get-service pipelined where object, and then we see it's asking really for a status equals running. Yes, this may be a little bit more complex, the where-object portion. with PowerShell version 3, things have actually simplified somewhat. So not all commandlets will be as complex in terms of using all of the parameters with the various $signs and status and so forth. So in a moment, we're going to jump over and we'll start working with PowerShell with some of these basic get-service commands. However, the whole point of this is working with Exchange, right? So we have to look at Exchange commandlets as well. So some good examples of Exchange commandlets include things like get-mailbox, which will return to us all of the mailboxes on any given server. Get-mailbox statistics, where you can put in the mailbox and it will return information about that mailbox itself. Get-mailbox-organizational unit sales will return to us all of the mailboxes that are from users in the sales organizational unit. Get-mailbox pipelined out set mailbox dash prohibit send quota 500 megabytes. This is interesting because what we did here was we got the mailboxes. In that case, it would be all of the mailboxes for our Exchange organization because we didn't put any additional parameters there. And then we pipelined that out and said, now that we have those mailboxes, now that we know exactly which ones we're going to focus on, we're going to make a change to all of those mailboxes. And we use the set-mailbox to make a change. What change are we making? Well, we're changing the prohibit send quota to 500 megabytes. So what we're actually saying with the prohibit send quota is this is actually part of your storage quotas, where if a user has a mailbox that has reached or exceeded 500 megabytes, the system will no longer send their email at this point. So it's the prohibit send at, in this case, 500 megabytes. So when you're working with storage quotas, you can go in and you can set this up through the GUI, or you can use something like a PowerShell commandlet. Let's say you wanted to narrow this down to the organizational unit sales. You would type get-mailbox-organizational unit space sales, and then pipeline that out to set-mailbox prohibit send quota 500 megabytes. So you can see how once you start getting comfortable with PowerShell, you can actually accomplish quite a bit with one single line. If you know how to use it properly, you'll get more comfortable over time, you'll get better and better with it, and before you know it, you'll be an expert. Okay, so let's jump over to our server and let's take a look at the Exchange Management Shell. Perhaps this is the first time you're working with PowerShell, so we'll get started with some simple commandlets. But if you have worked with PowerShell before, but perhaps not the Exchange Management Shell, not to worry, we're going to start working with those Exchange commandlets as well, and we'll show you how to find more information about those Exchange commandlets so that you have examples you can follow, and that will help you to become more comfortable as well. So for starters, let's open up the Exchange Management Shell. To do that, we'll go to our Start screen, we'll scroll over, and you can see here we have the Exchange Management Shell. There's also an Exchange Toolbox icon, which we'll talk about that at the end of the lesson. This is something that we spent more time on with Exchange 2010. There were more tools in the toolbox, but we'll just cover it briefly here with Exchange 2013. Now, you can select the little tile, or you can just type in Exchange from the Start screen, and you can see it brings up your shell, your toolbox, and some help. So we click the shell. So here you can see the Exchange Management Shell actually provides us quite a bit of information. And it's very different from when we just open up PowerShell. We open up PowerShell, it brings us right to a prompt. No extra information, no help, just takes us right there. But with the Exchange Management Shell, you can see that they're trying to be helpful. So they provide a list of commandlets. If you want to see a full list of commandlets, we type get-command. Only Exchange commandlets, get-exchange command or EX command. Commandlets that match a specific string. For general help, we type help. If we want help with a commandlet, you type get-help space, then you type in the actual command that you want help with. So we're going to take a look at all of this. The other cool thing about the Exchange Management Shell is that they have these tips of the day, and so they change each time. And you can learn something new every time you open up the Exchange Management Shell if you just take a moment to read the tip. So here we are, we're at our command prompt, and let's just type a command that we could actually type right in PowerShell. So there is a distinction. PowerShell, if we open up PowerShell, we can type in the get-service command, and it shows us the services. But if I type get-mailbox, it doesn't know what that is. So that's good to keep note of, that the commandlets for Exchange, the actual management pack for Exchange that is required for PowerShell, has been snapped in with the Exchange Management Shell. Now, you can snap it into PowerShell as well, but there's no point. We have an Exchange Management Shell for that. So we can use. So with the EMS, you can use both your normal PowerShell commands and your Exchange commands, but it doesn't work the other way around. In PowerShell, you cannot use your Exchange commands unless you snap in the extra Exchange Management commandlets. So we're not going to work on that. We're not going to show you how to do that. You can research how you can snap in your Exchange Management commandlets as well into your PowerShell. But from within the Exchange Management Shell, if I type get-service, it brings up the services in the same way. Now, what's interesting is with various commandlets, if you're not exactly sure what the commandlet is, here if we just clear the screen, if I were to type get-serve, and I'm not really sure if it's services or service or what, if I hit the tab key, it will start walking me down a list of various get-ser type commands in order to help me. So you can see there's quite a number, but you see we just passed the one, get-service, and there it is. So you might not need that for something as simple as get-service, but you might need it for something else. Like here, if we know there's a test replication type tool and we type test-r and we hit enter, okay, so this isn't the one. No, there we go, test replication health. You can see how this could really narrow things down. There are so many commandlets. So if we type get command, look at all the different commandlets. Now, if we type get ex command, you can see that took less time. So we can look through now and we can scroll up, and you can see these are various commandlets that can help us, but it's really these ones up at the top that really relate to Exchange. Right? Get, set, you can see all the different verbs that come into play: start, stop, suspend, test. And you recall we talked about this, the verb-noun structure of PowerShell and the Exchange Management Shell. So let's just clear the screen again. And let's just use the pipeline to help us to get more information by stringing commandlets together. So we type get-service space, put in the pipeline, space where object, and then you put in the $ underscore dot status is equal to running. We close it off and we hit enter. And now you can see that we're only looking at services that are running. Okay, so now let's actually start working with some of our Exchange commandlets. If we type in get-mailbox and we hit enter, you notice it returns to us the two mailboxes that we currently have. So we don't have a lot of mailboxes yet. We haven't started creating recipients. But we do have an administrator mailbox and we have a discovery search mailbox, which we'll discuss later on. When we look at this administrator mailbox, it only gives us a little bit of information. It gives us the alias, the server name, and the prohibit send quota. Okay, and that's set to unlimited. If we wanted to get more information on this mailbox, we could actually type get-mailbox administrator. But watch what happens. All that does is give us that same information. It just excludes the discovery search mailbox now. Alright, so we need to do something more here. We hit the up arrow, we put a space, and we pipeline this out, and we want a formatted list. To get that, we type in FL and hit enter. Okay, and so now we get a little bit more information about this mailbox. Right? We can see various attributes about the administrator and the mailbox itself. Is the mailbox on in-place hold or not? The audit owner of the mailbox, and all sorts of other information, quite a bit actually, by looking at it from the formatted list. Let's clear the screen again. We can also get mailbox statistics if we type get mailbox, and note I'll hit the tab key, search, server, spelling, statistics. There we go. And here it gives us an item count of 1, and it shows us that there's no storage limit status. So that gives us some statistics about that mailbox itself. However, if we just wanted mailbox statistics and we hit enter, it wants an identity provided. In this case, it knows that something is missing, so it's asking us for an identity. And now it gives us that information. Now, if we wanted to actually put in that prohibit send quota, the way we would do this is by typing get-mailbox administrator pipelined out to set-mailbox prohibit send quota. And again, you can see that the tab works not just with commandlets, but with the parameters as well. And then we'll put in 500 megabytes. Okay, and it's always a good thing when we don't see any response from PowerShell. When it responds badly, it gives us red text. When it doesn't respond at all to us and gives us no indication that things worked, that's usually a good indication that things worked. So just an FYI there, that it's not a bad thing when it doesn't tell us, hey, this worked out okay. But sometimes it's good to go back and make sure that it worked properly. Let's just clear the screen. If we type get mailbox administrator, and we don't need to format this list because it will just tell us right from the get-go. Now you can see we have a prohibit send quota. So again, this is just an easier way to do things sometimes. If you know your commandlets, if you know how to work with PowerShell and the Exchange Management Shell, you can get quite a bit done with just one line of code. Now, if you're not exactly sure how to use the various commands and commandlets and so forth, the help is really excellent. For example, let's say you want to learn more about how to use the get-mailbox commandlet. Well, you can type in get-help get-mailbox and hit enter. And you can see it provides us with a lot more information along with all of the different parameters and the syntax for that commandlet. At the same time, it gives us a description, related links, and then it tells us how we can get more information about using that commandlet. For example, if we type the -examples at the end, it will show us all of the different examples that are provided in the help for the get-mailbox commandlet. So let's just hit the up arrow, type -examples, and now you can see sometimes this can be more helpful than help itself, because now we can see different examples of how we can get this information that we're looking for, depending on what it is we need. So here you can see right here at the top, get mailbox result size unlimited. This will return a list of all the mailboxes in your organization, as opposed to get mailbox organizational unit users, which will give us a list of all the mailboxes in that organizational unit, and so on. You can see how all of this is great information if we need examples, not just for the get mailbox, but here if we want to use it for the set mailbox as well. And now you can see how you can set various things, like in this case, this example sets the mail tip translation in French and Chinese for this mailbox, john@contoso.com. So some real fun things you can do with PowerShell through the Exchange Management Shell. It's something that you have to get more comfortable with, and throughout this course as well as future Exchange 2013 courses, we'll sprinkle in some PowerShell commands that can really be valuable so that you learn it as you go. Now, we did mention before we conclude this lesson that we would demonstrate and talk about the toolbox. If we go back to our start screen and we open up the Exchange toolbox, here we see 3 tools: the Details Templates Editor, the Remote Connectivity Analyzer, which is actually just going to take us to an online web-based tool so that we can test our connectivity, and then Mail Flow tools. So here we have the Q Viewer, This will help us to manage mail queues. We're not going to actually open up each of these tools and start working with them. It's just good for you to know that currently the toolbox, well, it's a little sparse from toolboxes back in Exchange 2010 and Exchange 2007, but there are some tools, including the Queue Viewer. If this is something that you relied on in the past to help you, well, it's still there. Okay, so hopefully this provides a solid foundation for your working and managing Exchange 2013 using either the Exchange Admin Center or the Exchange Management Shell. It's true we will spend the majority of our time as administrators in the EAC. But over time, I'd like to encourage you to spend more time working with the Exchange Management Shell, getting more comfortable with PowerShell, because it's certainly not going away. It's not a fad, and it will make you a more powerful administrator. You'll be able to do more through PowerShell than you can ever dream of doing through a GUI. Hopefully that's a big takeaway from this lesson, that you need to be experts with PowerShell and start getting more comfortable with the Exchange Management Shell. So we hope you found this informative. I'd like to thank you for viewing, and I'll see you in the next lesson.